Facebook. All right.
All right, hold on here. All right, so I'll say a little intro and then you can hit the... Oh, now I'm too loud. Just be... Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
It's Sanchez himself. We have David Walker in studio for this very special edition of Portland at the Movies.
In a world, in a time, in a land of eternal beauty, all that stands between a city and a disaster. In a city where anything can happen. If you thought you had seen it all.
You must be saving your allowance, Gene. Let's seal it with a kiss.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Portland at the Movies. I'm one of your hosts, Todd Werkhoven, and I am here with Mark Middleton. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing really well.
And of course, Brian, the Unipiper. How are you, Brian?
I'm good. I'm excited for this.
Good, good. Yes, I have a little introduction. David Walker. I have a little buzz in my ear. Am I the only one? Is it just me?
It's coming from all the microphones. Sorry.
It's just too much to have all in one room.
It's excited.
Well, I'll cut that all out in post. David Walker has been a Portland fixture for over 4 decades, working in both in front and behind the camera. He's also a prolific author and creator of characters and websites from Badass Mofo to Darius Logan to Black Santa's Revenge to filling in for a fired Tim Riley on The Rick Emerson Show to writing for internationally known DC and Marvel characters such as Power Man and Iron Fist, Cyborg, Luke Cage, Occupy Avengers, Nighthawk. He has also created the fantastic new DC character Naomi and is responsible for the graphic novels The Life of Frederick Douglass and Bitterroot and so many more things. But of course, we all remember him as the indelible Sanchez in the Portland classic Fatal Revenge. It's David Walker. David, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I'm like, all of a sudden my whole life is flashing in front of me.
It's like a terrible version of This Is Your Life that we brought you onto.
A lot of bad decisions, and but that's okay. That's good.
Well, the reason we're having you on the show is not just because you've been involved in an amazing amount of Portland culture for the past years, but every time we researched one of these movies that we've reviewed on the show that we have never heard of, your name came up as either the person responsible for still talking about the movie or as somebody who was, interviewed about the movie. And it's your fingerprints are all over the Portland film scene. And
I think it's like once an episode you mentioned David Walker.
Yeah, I was trying to think, and I didn't listen back to them all because that would have been pointless. But it's like 3/4 of our episode. At some point, your name comes up.
Todd saying David Walker supercut.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, it's weird, I because in some ways this is what we're talking about feels like my past life. I recently went to a screening at the Hollywood Theater for James Westby's new documentary at the movies.
I want to see that.
And that was like a total past life experience because there was a ton of film people, ton of production people at this event, most of whom I haven't seen in a very long time. And it sort of reminded me of the life that I used to live that we're here to talk about right now.
So when did you did you grow up in Portland, or when did you get to Portland?
I moved here. My mom got a job here when I was in junior high. Okay. So moved here when I was, like 12 years old or something like that. And
the formative years.
Yes, definitely the formative years. And so went to junior high and high school here and was just sort of a restless kid. So I moved around the city a lot, would take the bus different places, go to the movies and at different theaters. I don't think any of the movie theaters I went to when I was a kid are still around anymore.
Wow.
And then eventually, got involved in film a little bit here and met just some of the wacky, colorful characters that were that populated that there was a scene for sure. It's not that well documented or talked about anymore, but I was here really for a lot of I guess you'd say the tail end of it.
So how did you because that scene, it wasn't like the Hollywood machine type scene that we might see around like Leverage or something like that. I mean, it was a very indie an Indian underground scene. So how do you even get involved in that?
Well, how did I get involved with
Yeah,
that?
sure.
That's a crazy. So I was going to Mount Hood Community College at the time. This was like 87, 88, somewhere in there. And one of my best friends from high school was also going to Mount Hood Community College. And he calls me up one day. This is my friend JR, and JR is also in Fatal Revenge.
Right.
And he calls me up one day and he says, hey, my dad knows a guy who's making a kung fu movie. We should go audition for it, which seemed like the stupidest thing to say. But
or the greatest.
And so we were like, sure. And the thing was, Jay didn't have a car. I had a car, right? So I went and picked him up, and we drove over to Northwest Portland on, I want to say it's like about 18th and Lovejoy or Kearney. I could take you to the building. I just can't remember the streets. But there was an old film lab there, and there was a screening room. And this is back in the day when the news was now being shot on video. But in the 50s and 60s, they would shoot the news on film, and then the film would have to be developed. Every major city that had a news program or news channels, they had a film lab. And so Portland's was based over there at the company was called Technifilm. And so pretty much any filmmaker in town had an office either near there or around there. And that was where the auditions for Fatal Revenge were. And so that was really sort of our introduction there. This was, like I said, it was 87, 88. And there was a few other productions going on, either that had just wrapped or were getting ready to go into production. There was a guy named Steve Miller, had just wrapped up on something, and he was getting ready to start something new. And honestly, this is one of those things, because my memory isn't as great as it could be. There was there's only like one or two casting agents, so they, once we went in, JR and I were like the two young Turks that no one had ever seen before, right?
The fresh faces.
And we went in, and neither of us were particularly good actors, but we treated the whole thing like it was a huge joke.
Right.
And amazingly, we both got cast.
So had you ever heard of this guy or this production? Or
Nothing.
So it was pretty blind.
Yeah, and all I knew was like kung fu movie, right? and really, it's not that much of a kung fu movie.
Were you into film in general at this time?
I was, but I was at Mount Hood Community College. I was studying graphic design and art, and was actually getting ready to move to New York City to go to the School of Visual Arts. I had done some acting in high school and some acting in college, and had dabbled in film, but I had my eyes set on going into the comic book industry at this point. We'll say I was like 19 or 20, and that was really where all my focus was. So the thought of doing a movie was just like, yeah, okay, I'll be able to say I did it. And so we went down there, and JR got cast in a bigger part, and everybody just loved him. He is still such a lovable guy. And so he started getting cast in a couple other local productions, like on the strength of his performance in Fatal Revenge as Guido. And
Power of that movie.
yeah, and the thing was I had a car and he didn't.
Right.
So I would have a tendency to like drive in places.
Yeah.
And then they would meet me, and so like I was an extra in one of Steve Miller's movies. And then I was an extra in two of his movies. I've never seen either of them all the way through, and I would see him pretty regularly. But he had an office there in that Technifilm building, and that was sort of it really was like ground zero.
I was just gonna say ground zero. We have a map that I put together after every episode of the different locations, and you can click on the little marker or whatever and see that location from that movie at that time or whatever. And so I feel like we need like the ground zero mark on wherever you had those auditions.
Yeah, it was, and it was interesting because even though they stopped, like, because they would develop the film there for a very, very long time. They did that for years, up until I would say the late 80s, early 90s. One of the last films that I worked on, I remember we were taking the film to the airport because it had to be developed down in LA. So we drop it off at the Alaska air freight. It would get sent down to LA, then it would come back and it would go to that Technifilm building because they still had a screening room with a 35 projector in there.
Okay.
And it was interesting because this particular film, which starred Andrew McCarthy from Weekend at Bernie's and Mannequin, who was not a particularly pleasant person. This was right before nonlinear editing came in, so that was why the film was having to be developed. And I remember this was shot out in St. Helens. We had to move a giant like flatbed editor that I think was borrowed from. It had to have been borrowed from Will Vinton Studios. And it was heavy because I remember being one of the people that had to load it into the van. And but yeah, you would head down to the Technifilm building, and I didn't hang out there a lot, but you would go down there and you would see people, and it was just sort of like, it was just small enough of a community that people would kind of recognize each other. Oh, hey, how you doing? That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did this early Portland film scene start to develop into kind of the place where indie darlings kind of got their start? Gus Van Sant and Penny Out, like those types of people. Is that the same group?
There was a lot of that group, and they were doing some interesting stuff in the 70s. So there was Penny Allen and Eric Edwards and Gus Van Sant, and then Don Gronquist and George Hood, and there was I can't remember the name of it. There was a cable access show that apparently everybody was working on, and they were shooting these little shorts, and Penny did Property, and then I can't remember the other movie, and Gronquist and those guys had done Rockaday Ritchie, and this is all before my time. This is all stuff, stories I got out of people, and but that was sort of where it was. It was in back in those days. A lot of cities had their sort of independent film scene, and because again there was the film lab, so all somebody needed was either a camera, a 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter camera, which a lot of the old TV studios, when they were transitioning from film to video, they still had the cameras, right? So you get a camera, you borrow one for the weekend.
Vernonia incident guy I think used TV cameras because he was like
he was at Coin, I think.
He worked, so that makes sense. I never thought about that.
Vernonia incident. Who's that? Who made that one?
Oh man, what's his name, Brian? You want to look that up?
I'll
That's
look that up.
A fascinating.
I worked on something out in Vernonia once. What was that?
Probably the Vernonia incident.
It had
that
another
might be the
Redneck
it had like
Revenge.
it had like
and
7
6
subtitles as
Okay.
different distribution companies bought it. They just kept changing the names, and the names got like more and more specific, which was very strange.
Oh, okay. So that one was Ray Etheridge.
Okay. Ooh, I know.
Oh, he went off to make Fart the movie.
Yes.
Oh,
and
I
he's
have
made some
no idea
weird
who that
stuff.
person is. Wow. So there you go. I just learned something new.
Yeah, well, there you go.
But yeah, so they would, I remember, I can't remember. Gus was running like sound on some of Penny Allen's movies. I think he might have worked on Rockaday Ritchie a little bit. Everybody sort of knew each other from the local scene, and then Gus made Malinoche, and that put him on the map, sort of the indie scene. And the thing was, like, something like this was going on in a lot of other cities, but nobody was making particularly good movies, right? So you would get something like Miami Connection or something like that, and
If
that's
only we
most
were
of,
so lucky.
and that's
Yeah.
most of what was happening in Portland.
Right.
And then the thing that really sort of shifted it in a lot of ways was would have to be Drugstore Cowboy, and that was what, 88 or 89. And so that was, this right around the same time that Fatal Revenge was getting made, and I was like, had no interest in working in film. It was like, I'm going to go off and do something else. And when I moved to New York and just had such a bad experience at school and really became disillusioned with art and design and illustration and all that sort of stuff, and started writing more. And then I came back to Portland, and it was like, oh, well, I'm writing, and hey, I made a movie. I was part of a movie. And the thing was, Fatal Revenge was so ineptly made. And if anyone who worked on it listens to this, you can't deny it wasn't
Right.
epically made.
Prove me wrong.
But I remember at the time, like I said, we'll say I was 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old. I remember thinking while I was on set, like, well, anybody can do this, right? And this was shot on 35. This is before
Wow.
the days of, digital video and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. And so I was so disillusioned with the comic industry at that point, and I came back to Portland with my tail between my legs. I started writing more, and I sort of had this vision of what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, if those guys could make Fatal Revenge, I could do anything. And it turns out making movies was a lot harder than I thought it would be. But it also got me caught up in that world for, on and off for about 10 years.
So when did you make Black Santa's Revenge? What year
That was fairly recently.
I
That
thought so.
was like 2006 or
Okay.
so. Yeah, I think it was 2006 is when we shot it.
Okay. Okay.
And at that point, I had, my career was all over the place. I had, sometimes you hit this point where you give up on your dreams and then you get a real job. And for me, every time I did that, I was like, oh, this sucks. And so then I would go back to pursuing my dreams and making, film and video, or film in some capacity. It had always been there, but also doing comics was there. And comics in a lot of ways superseded film. And I started to realize at some point that, as easy as it is to make a movie, making the comics is not easier. No, but it's just everything is so time consuming that after a point you realize, well, I can't work on 20 things all at once.
Right.
And it's just started focusing.
Right. So what do you think we have this late 80s era of promise? What happens? Like, there are not a lot of good movies that we're discovering, and it's always the thing of unless it has kids in it is kind of the
So that the boom that we saw that is of questionable quality, is that the direct result of this indie movement?
I think that what happened was there was production started coming up here to. This is even in the days before there was like major tax breaks, but you could shoot on location here. It was, if I remember correctly, it was a right to work state. So the unions weren't getting heavily involved. You have to pay, actors who were in SAG, but if you didn't have SAG actors in a movie, then it was really cheap to work here. And so like the Teamsters weren't getting involved. So I think that had something to do with it. It's also fairly close to LA, so you could, fly up here and get stuff done fairly inexpensively. And what would happen was that some of these productions were coming up here, and we're talking into the 80s and 90s, whether it's a movie like Frozen Assets or Goonies or something like that, something a little bit bigger. But then some of the people started relocating here, some of the crew people, because it was cheaper to work here, or it was cheaper to live here. And so people were buying houses. So there was this sort of generation of, there was the people who lived in Portland who were trying to make movies, the Gus Van Sants, the Don Gronquists, all of them. And then there was that, we'll call them first generation, even though there was a generation before that. We'll call them second generation. And then you had the people that worked on Brain Smasher, who decided to call Portland home.
You're credited as I forget what for Brain Smasher on your IMDb page.
I did a lot of stuff on that movie. I did that was my boot camp of behind the scenes.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm interested.
Is that
to
the one
see
with
it now.
Terry Hatcher?
Terry Hatcher and Andrew Dice Clay. Yeah, it's a classic.
Why am I thinking Army of Darkness got Bruce Campbell? Is he in that too, or
Nope.
not?
No.
Or am I just thinking that's a very Bruce Campbell title?
Oh,
of some
there
sort?
is Brain something with Bruce Campbell.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I know the one
Brain
you're talking-
Wave,
yeah.
maybe.
Oh, funny.
And Bruce Campbell's down in, or at
Yeah.
least I don't know if he's still
I'm surprised
is.
he's not
Oregon.
in more of them, frankly.
Because he's got his money. He doesn't need
That's
that.
true.
He's,
He's got his Sam Raimi money.
but yeah, no, so people started relocating up here, and then then a lot of the productions went away. Up in Canada, they started getting better tax breaks for film productions, and so it dried up really, really quickly. Like it had to have been like around 94, 93, 94, where suddenly it was just like there just wasn't that much work.
Yeah.
And then the work became stuff like, oh, Chevrolet shooting 3 or 4 car commercials here, and you crew up on that.
Huh.
and at some point I just was like, well, this is not what I don't want to be a PA anymore,
Right.
and so I just sort of focused on my writing and let all that stuff go by the wayside.
Right. Oh, I just totally forgot what I was going to say.
Should we talk about Fatal Revenge?
Should we get into it? Okay,
Sure.
because you've got a couple great stories from the making of Fatal Revenge. Now, I think on your YouTube page, the Badass Mofo YouTube page, there is a great video that's like a 4-minute distillation
Yeah.
of Fatal Revenge.
And that was what they took to, I'm assuming, the different film markets to try to sell
Yeah, because
it.
I mean, it literally just tells the whole story.
entire
It's not a
story, yeah.
trailer; it just tells the story. So that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. Because there's even a narrator guy that helps. Because I think after we all watched it, we watched then we're like, oh,
Right, because we just
that
watched it
makes
in
sense.
German
Yeah.
and made up our own plot.
That's true. We didn't even watch it.
a cop with a bad attitude. Yeah.
Did you tell him what we were going to do with our German copy of the film?
Oh, what we wanted to do is have someone who knows German. You do a better, Mark.
So my sister was married to a German guy, and so he was translating it
Okay.
loosely into English, and then we were just going to dub in the English translation of the German translation of the English movie.
And then over the years, like cobble together performances of guests or have them read a couple lines and just dub in our own movie.
Release the Werkhoven cut.
So, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, and this is, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, but I would not be surprised if I still have the script to Fatal Revenge
wow.
somewhere. I'm a borderline hoarder. I'm probably like a week away from being a hoarder. But I remember holding on to that script for a very long time because when I wrote my first screenplay, that I used that as the template how to format it.
Sure,
and
sure.
And so I'm pretty sure, because that's one of the, for someone like me who does not get rid of anything,
Yeah.
that's one of those things that I know I would have kept.
Right.
I just have no idea where
it
it is.
ended
Right.
up.
So, but you know what? I remember a couple days ago, sort of looking around my office, going, "God, there's so much crap here. I gotta get rid of stuff." And so, if I do a serious spring cleaning, which I am planning on doing, and I find it, I'll let you know.
Okay, good.
And
That'll save us a lot of work, I think.
But then I also have the it in English language dub of the movie too. So.
Should we show a little clip?
Yes,
let's see what we.
So tell us about your character. What informed your character, and what is your character doing in the movie?
Why don't we just show a
Oh, okay.
clip first? Here we go.
Wow, that is an entrance.
I want the whole movie to be about that character.
We need this sand.
To us, it was.
Na, Sanchez? Wie geht's, Bruder?
Einfach super. Was sieht ihr Burschen heute wieder hübsch aus?
Ach, vergiss es, Mann. Sag mal, bist du bereit für den Deal?
Meine Güte, du hast es ja wieder furchtbar eilig.
You got the goods.
Yeah. Primo.
Ja, prima. Jackson? Die Übergabe läuft. An die Arbeit, Leute.
It's oddly more compelling. So yes, that was the German version we have, which
Wow.
wasn't your voice, but
No,
it
no.
was also not your voice, which we played in our little intro clip. The English version was also not your voice.
No. But that was my hair. And
Yes, who was responsible for the styling of this movie? Was
there was no
it was
styling
like,
at all.
Come as you are.
So to just to contextualize this part of it, that part, I was incredibly obsessed with with the entire Minneapolis sound at that point. Prince and the Revolution, Morris Day and the Time, and I just wanted hair like that so bad. And so that's what that was. That was my hair. As I said before, my friend JR and I went in and we auditioned, and I remember reading for Sanchez, and I can't remember the other part that they had me read for. I so did not take this seriously that I didn't get that the character of Sanchez was gay. And so I got cast in the part. I was super excited. I want to say they paid me like it was some ridiculously low amount of money, like $200 or $300 total, right? And I'm pretty sure that it was JR who called me up, and he read the whole script because he'd been cast too, and he was like, "Hey, you know, you're playing a gay guy, right?" You know, and I was like, "Really? No." And then I read it, and I was like, "Oh, I guess he is." So again, you know, and this is such a different time and era. I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't really much of an actor.
You had only seen Mannequin.
Yeah,
with,
yeah. I don't even think Mannequin was out yet. And so I was just like, okay, well, I remember borrowing a shirt from my mom, and that sort of leopard print thing that you see in the beginning,
the blouse,
and I can't remember who did my makeup, but it was very gaudy,
right?
And I guess I was like, I was either doing like a Paul Lynde or a Charles Nelson Riley, but I also was with this really, because the character's name was Sanchez. I was also trying to do this bizarre Spanish accent, right? So it was, I honestly can't remember, but I remember it being very much like this, and trying to talk like a sultry Latin, you know, Lothario, and again, I didn't
command performance.
Yeah, it was just so surreal to me, and again, I had no idea what movies, how they were. I mean, I knew how they were made, mind you, but I didn't really have much experience. So on the set, it was just like, wow, okay, this, like, anybody can do this. And because JR was in more of the film, he started shooting before I did, and he would call me like every day afterwards and be like, I don't think these people know what they're doing. And Phil Roth, the director, his mom was she did all the catering and craft services, and she wasn't a particularly good cook. So everybody, like, I kept hearing the stories about how bad the food was. And then that scene that clip we just showed was my, I think that was I only shot 3 or 4 days. I think that might've been my first day of shooting. It was either that or it was I only shot for 3 days. I remember that now because there was one day out in Cascade Locks, that airstrip, which I think was out by Powell Butte somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And then somewhere over in
It was that scene in the inner East Side Industrial District. It looked like, I think,
but it was further north, so
Okay.
it wasn't down near. It was closer to like the Fremont Bridge.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like I'm trying to remember, like what was there. They drove me there though. That's the thing I remember. I had to drive myself to all the other things, but this was the one time for some reason they
Did they
drove me
blindfold you too?
there. You know. Yeah, there was a moment where I thought, oh, I'm gonna get killed here.
I was going to ask about this.
Yeah, safety was not a high priority.
Well, because oddly enough, in the German version that we watched, this scene I think that you're going to tell the story about is cut out.
Oh,
And
okay.
the only place we saw it is the little 4-minute version, and that is the part where you get shot.
Where you get killed, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually put that whole clip, just that clip of me getting killed,
Oh,
up
nice.
as well.
Oh, funny.
And it's like maybe 19 seconds or something, and it's and we shot that scene out in Cascade Locks. That's when I get double crossed, and Gene kills me, and I remember going out there to shoot this thing, and they had to wire me up with these squibs, these homemade squibs, and I was wearing one of my mom's blouses, right?
Oh, no.
And the special effects guy was like, "Oh, it's going to be a shame to ruin this thing," and I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Oh, well, it's going to get destroyed," and I was like, "Well, no, this is my mom's. I'm not going to do that." So I made Phil, the director, take off his sweatshirt because this is going to sound so terrible, so homophobic, but I got to say it. It was the gayest thing that was on set, right? It was that light blue sort of thing. And I was like, okay, this is something that looks like I would wear it as a
this character.
gay Mexican drug dealer. And Phil and I were about the same size. So I made him take off his sweatshirt. I put that on. They wired me up, and guy named John Schmier, who was a really nice guy. He was the special effects guy. He'd made all the squibs himself, and I remember him asking Phil, the director. He said something about, oh, we should give him an earplug so that when the squibs go off, it won't mess up his hearing. And Phil was like, no, you'd see that earplug on camera. And so I said so I look at Schmier, he was a big guy. He was like probably 400 pounds. I was like, Schmier looks at me like, okay. And I said, well, how loud is it going to be? And he goes, it's no louder than a gunshot going off next to your ear. And I think to myself, oh, well, how loud can that be? Right. So they wire me up. And because of the whole nature of it, we were only going to get one take. They had 2, maybe 3 cameras rolling at the same time, and the entire direction I got was okay. The shots are going to be coming from this way, and so just pretend you get shot and fall back in the car, and you're going to get shot 3 times. And I was like, okay, and I'll tell you, that squib hurt so bad, and it was so loud. And the other thing was that they'd made like this rawhide vest that the squibs were on top of the rawhide vest, which was under my shirt, but they affixed it to my body with electrician's duct tape, right? So like I'm a very hairy guy. So the squibs go off, and by the time the 3rd squib goes off, it was so loud that it literally knocked me unconscious, right? Jeez. So if you see the clip and I'm falling back into the car, I'm completely unconscious when this happens. And so I come to, nobody says anything. I'm just like ass out in the open doorway of this car. I come to, and everyone's like, wow, that was amazing. Now you just need to sit there while we set up the next shot. So we set up the next shot. I sat there for like over an hour. And meanwhile, I'm in an incredible amount of pain. I can't figure out why I'm in so much pain. I've lost all the hearing in my left ear. And so we finally finish, and I'm covered in fake blood. And I go back to we wrap, I wrap. I'm like, I'm getting the hell out of here. So I drive back to this motel over in Cascade Locks, and I'm literally covered in fake blood with this shredded up sweatshirt. I go into the motel room to take a shower and to get all this fake blood off of me before I drive back to Portland, and the blood's not coming off. And like, it's just, there's more of it and more of it and more of it and more of it. And that's when I realized that part of the squib had cut into my face and torn out a chunk of my face. Jeez. And so I'm in the shower just bleeding all over the place. And yep, there we go. We're watching that clip right now. And yeah, sorry. It was
I have it on my
okay.
I'll send you a link here.
And so I just remember thinking at that moment, this is before Brandon Lee had gotten killed. Right. But because I was enough of a film nerd, I knew that this was how Vic Morrow got killed, right?
Oh my God.
And so I was so livid, and that happened also. It was supposed to be my last day of shooting. When they wanted me to come back to loop the sound, I was like, no, I'm not done. I'm done completely with you guys.
This is not worth my life.
And they wanted me to come back. I had moved to New York by then. And, but yeah, that was, I tell people all the time, that's the most authentic acting I've ever done in my life. Cause I literally had lost consciousness.
You were going to die. Wow. Yeah. There's three squib explosions that happen.
Yeah.
I emailed it to you, Mark. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to. That needs to be a GIF. Maybe I'll make that into a GIF.
Oh, please do.
Sorry, was that me?
Sorry.
Or you?
No,
so the funny thing is I have no shame, so I will show this to people. Obviously, I put it up. It's on my YouTube channel. but Sanford Green, one of the comic book artists that I work with, is obsessed with this clip. So whenever we're at a convention together, he will break out his phone, pull up this video, and show it to everybody. And I don't know, how many views does it have? It doesn't have, it's only got about 1,000, right?
4,500.
4,000. Yeah,
So-
most of those are probably Sanford showing them to somebody. But yeah, so that was, that was my experience in making Fatal Revenge. And yeah.
So after it came out, did you even know it was released? Did you see it for a while, or
It never,
I was going to say, was it released?
it never got an official release in the U.S. I was given a copy by, or JR actually was given a copy by somebody who worked on the set, was given a VHS copy, which he gave to me,
Sorry.
and then I dubbed it. And there was a time where, so I used to work at a video store in Southeast Portland. So there was a time when like other people who'd worked on the movie heard that I had a copy of the movie. So they would come to the video store so I could run a dub for them.
Wow.
And
we're here for the personal stash?
yeah, for Fatal Revenge. But I think it got a theatrical release like in Germany and Greece maybe, or Turkey or something like that.
Well, Germany would make sense because that eBay seller or whatever that Mark found for, didn't he have like 9 copies of it or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah,
Oh,
he
wow.
had
So he
multiple
had a
copies.
surplus.
So, but it's never, it never got an official release in the U.S. They made up a poster, and they took it to whatever film markets there were back in the day, like AFM or MeFed or something like that. But they weren't able to sell it, which is saying a lot.
Yeah.
Because there was so much garbage being sold back in those days, and it had to have taken about 2 to 3 years for them to finish it. I know that with the having to re-record the sound and all that sort of stuff, because it seems to me like, like I said, this was 87, 88 that we shot it, but I don't remember seeing my copy of it till around 92, maybe something
Whoa.
like that.
Wow.
And it was just like, yeah, it was bad. And I know at least one of the cameras that they used belonged to Tom Shaw, but all of them might have belonged to Tom Shaw. I
Yeah,
can't
that's kind
remember
of
for
what.
sure.
That's another name that comes up a lot
Yeah.
because
Oh,
I think, as many people have pointed out, he had all the equipment that people came to
Everything.
Did
use.
you ever meet Tom Shaw?
Oh yeah, yeah.
We need to start our own Tom Shawcast.
Yeah, and everything you've heard about him is true.
It's true, all of it.
His office / studio, whatever you want to call it, was over in Southeast on Division.
Yep, Division
Like
of 50th.
And
Have you seen? And I forget, you found it on the Internet Wayback Machine. I think that documentary about Tom Shaw,
Right.
which is fascinating and just a lot of
was it-
video of the time.
was it like one of those like AM Northwest sort of?
No, it was
No.
like a full 20, 30
Ooh,
minute
wow.
thing. I
Yeah,
think.
we'll send you a link.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'd
It's
love to see that.
fascinating.
No, so I think the first time I met Shaw, I was only over there 2, maybe 3 times. I had written a screenplay at one point that I was trying to get money for. This would have been probably about 90. No, this was pretty early because again, I dropped out of college and was like, I'm going to make movies. Fatal Revenge, anybody can do this, right? So a friend of mine, we co-wrote a screenplay together, had no idea what we were doing.
You had the formatting though, because you had the
had the
script.
formatting, because I had the script exactly. And then we, I don't remember who, somebody said, oh, go talk to Tom Shaw. Tom Shaw, because so it was this script that had it was this raunchy 20-something sex comedy sort of thing, and
Right up Tom Shaw's alley.
yeah, and so that was why somebody said, go talk to Tom Shaw. So I remember going in there, and I brought the script with me, and he's flipping through it, and he's like, "What is all this?" And I was like, "Well, that's the dialogue." And he goes, "There's too much of it. You got to get rid of it. Nobody wants to see people talk." And then I go, "Well, if you turn to page 13, there's a sex scene." And he was like, "Yeah, more of this." So
Now this kid,
Yeah.
this is what you want to do.
So it became really clear that Tom Shaw was not going to get behind this particular film, and I'll say this was 90, right? And then a couple years later, somebody calls me up and is like, "Hey, it was in the Sunday Oregonian in the classified section. there was a job listing for a screenwriter. And somebody calls me up and goes, "Hey, someone's looking for a screenwriter. You should go get that job, right?" So I look at it, and it was Tom Shaw.
Oh, wow.
And he advertised for a screenwriter in the Sunday Oregonian.
That is amazing.
That's awesome.
And so this had to have been, I remember not having a car at this particular time. So I will say it was like 93, 94. And I remember taking the bus, the Division Street bus, to his place. He didn't remember me at all, but the guy he looked like a bulldog, and he just had the smoker's rasp like this, and he was like, "Okay, I'm making a movie, and there's no money to pay you to write it, but do you want to write it?" And I was like, "There's no money," and I was like, "I can do that for myself." So it didn't work out. I didn't. I didn't work on whatever that was, and he barely finished anything. I mean,
I was going to
Corey-
say
yeah.
he's got 2 listed. One of them a TV movie, but then Courier of Death, which I think to me
got that. It's
edges
terrible,
out.
yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it edges out Fatal Revenge in that we were talking earlier about that Alamo Drafthouse B movie,
Yeah.
best of the worst type thing, and I think that's still at the top of my list of favorite movies that we've done on this show. Is Courier of Death.
And that's got like the following in Europe. I
Yeah,
guess.
totally.
Yeah,
Scotland.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So I think I've got the transition.
Yeah.
We may have to tweak with audio
Okay.
after it.
Oh, Gene. Disappointed in you.
Hold on. Let me redo this.
there we go. I do.
Oh, Gene. I'm so disappointed in you.
I think that's probably about as loud as it actually was.
Yeah.
So again,
That
that was my real hair. That was the director's sweatshirt. And then that sitting position I was in, I had to sit there for probably about an hour as they reset up the cameras.
Jeez.
The things
Wow,
we
did
remember.
you? I mean, I was gonna say if somebody would have told you on that day that like 35 years later you would be first, I'd have to explain what a podcast was, but then that you would be talking about that still is so crazy.
Yeah, it's weird. It's definitely. I mean, thinking about all of this stuff is so odd to me because again, it brings back all these memories and you know, when we talk about sort of the history of film in Portland and productions in Portland, you know, that most of that generation is gone.
Yeah.
And so people come here, you know, we got an influx of people who came here to work on Leverage, or they came here to work on Portlandia. Some of them stayed, some of them left. But a lot of those who stayed, you know, never knew who Tom Shaw was, never heard of Fatal Revenge, never heard of any of this sort of stuff. And I've just, you know, I love collecting stories and experiences and you know, nothing killed me. I got hurt a little bit, but you know, it was fun.
Yeah.
No matter what. But the food was terrible. She was a terrible cook.
Well, and I think a lot of the reasons those stories are still alive is because, I mean, you've been writing about it for forever, and just I think it's sort of like when you move into a house that needs like the backyard redone or whatever, you never think to take pictures of just like what it looked like. You kind of take some before pictures,
but it's very rare. Yeah.
And like before you decorate the house you want, you never take that. And I think that's what this is like, it wasn't a great thing to look at, but it's important to keep around to see like this is where it kind of started, and this is what was happening at that time, because there aren't a lot of people, especially since so many of these movies are so hard to find.
Oh, they're lost. They're, you know, I mean, if a movie didn't get a home video release in the U.S., like Fatal Revenge didn't get, then nobody bothered to make a video master of it, right?
Yeah,
and so I don't know. I heard stories of a PAL version. This is VHS.
That is PAL.
Oh, this is PAL.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we ordered it and like waited weeks for it to, and we all got
From Germany.
From Germany, we got together to all watch it on an afternoon. We put it in,
And it was
wouldn't play.
it was PAL. Okay.
Yeah, and so then we got it ripped to a DVD.
Okay.
And then we took the DVD and
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, all it's.
It was a
Again,
lot of
there's-
work
There's so
to-
much. Yeah, and
just
it
watch
was
this movie.
It was
Now
so worth
anyone-
it, wasn't it?
Now,
Yeah,
now anyone can just go to YouTube and type in Fatal Revenge, and you'll get actually your little synopsis video or Fatal Revenge German.
Yeah.
And then you can watch it all in German.
Well, that was, I think, was it our first movie that we watched after Halloween Town? It was way up there.
it was way up there.
It was-
yeah.
it was
I think,
pretty-
I
I
think
think
it might have been.
Halloween Town.
I think Free
that's-
Willy was Free Willy was number 2, I think.
Yeah,
But
and
this
then
was,
this really set the tone for the rest of our journey.
yeah. It really was kind of a benchmark because it is that lost area that nobody talks about, and nobody, like you said, nobody kind of remembers. And I think that's been the most fun on this. Is as terrible as everything has been, it's so interesting
Yeah.
to find these buried little secrets. Just
And then people come out of the woodwork and like comment on our
Oh,
posts
yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah,
and it's like,
they're
oh,
like,
I was
"Oh,
an
I was in
extra
that."
and I had
Yeah,
a
isn't
story.
that crazy?
and-
Like you'll watch something. I remember watching Brain Smasher, and there's a scene outside of a nightclub. The interior was shot at, back then it was Starry Night. Now it's Roseland. But that was the interior. But the exterior was just some random spot. I can't remember where. But in the crowd, like, it's all my friends. Like, I knew all of those people. And that's one of those movies where, like, if they needed extras, I would just get on the phone and call people up, and they would show up. And yeah, it was really that, more so than anything. That's the movie that and Fatal Revenge are the two that I have the most memories of, because Fatal Revenge being the first, but Brain Smasher just being like, that was just a weird time in my life, man. Yeah. I did all kinds of crazy stuff, and I was watching Murder, She Wrote on cable not that long ago, and Tim Thomerson was on an episode, and I worked with Tim Thomerson on Brain Smasher, and I remember he I can't remember if he'd just gone through a really bad divorce, but he was just, all he did was talk about how he wanted to get high, and
with Kevin Costner.
Yeah,
as
right.
as he filmed The Postman.
So I didn't know anybody really who, I didn't know that many pot smokers back then, but I called one person I knew and set up a weed deal. So I was Tim Thomerson's weed dealer. And I remember he said to me, I shouldn't say this, but he said something to the effect of like, hey, well, if you can figure out where to get cocaine or someone who's willing to kill my ex-wife, let me know. And I was just like,
Introduce him to Tom Shaw.
I was like, yeah, I don't think I can help you out with that, sir.
So episode 6 was Fatal Revenge.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So we did Breaking In, Free Willy, Dr. Giggles, The Hunted, and Halloween Town before that.
Wow.
Doctor.
Jeez,
All
Dr.
classics,
Giggles.
Dr. Giggles.
And
yeah.
that's the other thing is like there's forgotten movies like Fatal Revenge, but then there's all of these forgotten movies that star like actual
like
stars.
Breaking In was a pretty high profile
It was
movie.
Burt Reynolds, yeah.
And who directed that? That was
Oh, I forget now.
I think it was
Siskel and Ebert loved it. It
Yeah, it
seems
was-
like that movie.
Is
We all hate it, but every time we read something about it, everybody loves it. And so, like, I can never figure out if it's just collectively us just missing the point of it, or if people are misremembering.
I you know what
It has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes.
It was Bill Forsyth.
Bill Forsyth, and I think isn't he Irish or something like that? I
Yeah.
can't remember. I think
Scottish.
so. This was made when Breaking In was made. The Temp and Brain Smasher and all this sort of stuff was getting made, and this was just like a cut above, I think, some of those movies. It seemed more like a real movie. I remember I've only seen this one time. It played.
It had a very indie vibe.
Yeah,
But it definitely was a real movie.
Yeah.
and that's what. And
But
it
I
was
mean,
like,
what-
oh, this is, and you saw recognizable locations, and there
Yeah.
was all these extras that were recognizable, and it felt like this was the closest thing to a good movie that was going to get made in Portland
Yeah.
by outsiders.
That's true.
But
That's true.
yeah,
And they
I
did have
haven't
a lot
seen
of
it in
great
ages.
looks.
Is it even available? It must be on video somewhere.
I think it's probably at Movie Madness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had no problem however we watched it.
Yeah.
But speaking of hard to find movies, what can you tell us about Love and Dynamite?
Ha ha ha! It's garbage. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I was in that. I played a really small part in that. So Love and Dynamite had to have been made So we shot Fatal Revenge, and right around the same time that Fatal Revenge was being shot, Steve Miller shot another movie. I want to say it was called Visions. Steve Miller was the director went on to direct Love and Dynamite. So a lot of people who worked on Fatal Revenge ended up moving over to Visions. It seems to me like even the camera equipment and everything, which a lot of it was Tom Shaw's, went over to Visions. And JR was cast in a pretty sizable part in this particular movie, Visions, which honestly I don't even remember what it was about.
Is that doesn't sound familiar. I'm looking at a man has troubling visions that lead him to suspect he may be a killer who is murdering hobos around town.
Yeah, so that was this. So
I think Stephen Miller is going to be my new best friend for a while.
So this was he was local, and I'll say this, he was a really nice guy, and so I was an extra. If I don't think I had a speaking part in Visions, but since JR was in the movie, and because I had a car, I would drive him around.
Think of where your life would be without this car that you had bought.
Yes, exactly. Oh, and the other thing, and this is one of those things I shouldn't admit to. This must have been shot like concurrently, at least with parts of Fatal Revenge, because Sandra, who was in Fatal Revenge, who played the lead, had a small part in Visions.
Okay.
And I remember JR calling me and saying he needed a ride to set, and that they were filming a scene that took place at a strip club, and did I want to be an extra? And I was like, hell yeah, because I'll get to see some nudity, right? And that was where I met Sandra for the first time, because we never worked together on Fatal Revenge. I'm sorry, this is such a long rambling story, but so Steve really liked JR, and when it came time to make Love and Dynamite, he cast JR in essentially the lead. And now the thing was Dan Haggerty was in it. Dan Haggerty, Grizzly Adams, and it was shot primarily on video. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, like, why the hell are you doing this? And I remember sitting down talking to Steve, and the guy who shot it was a guy named Dale, who has since passed away. But everybody was looking for an alternative to shooting on film, and video really wasn't it. But there was all these things. There was this film look process that people kept saying you can do. Oh, you can make video look like film. And for like the first 5 years of it, it never looked anything like film. And Love and Dynamite was one of those movies where I would say probably 25% of it was shot on either 16 or 35, and the rest was shot on video, and they were never able to get it to match up. And so I got a call from JR that Steve wanted to talk to me to play a preacher for some reason. The final scene in the movie, or one of the final scenes in the movie, there's a funeral, and I was like, okay, because I was the guy who was always around cracking jokes and cutting up. So I wrote this sermon, and I drove up to Vancouver, Washington, and shot this thing. And to this day, I've never seen that movie. I have a copy of it somewhere.
I was gonna say,
on
it doesn't
VHS.
have a picture, it doesn't have a description, it doesn't have anything, but it has a listing, so somebody made it.
It's not available anywhere.
It's
now, how does this?
I do have a copy of it somewhere. I will find that one, and that one you can.
Nice.
But here's the thing: this is what I can say for sure about Love and Dynamite, was that JR and I sat down multiple times to watch it, and we never got through it. It was so bad.
That's a 5 out of 10 somehow.
Yeah, but how many votes?
Based on
yeah,
probably
that's
one.
true.
Yeah.
Doesn't say how many reviews.
The one review, the title is Amateur Oddball Rarity.
Yes.
But it did get an official release in some capacity. So
Wow.
because like the VHS copy that I have is an actual, it's got a sleeve
Oh,
and all
okay.
that sort of stuff. So
to keep my eyes out for.
and I
bins.
I haven't seen Miller in years. Like I said, when I got this wild idea in my head that I was going to make movies, and wrote a couple screenplays, he was one of the few people that really sat down and talked to me. I can't remember who his first AD was, but she was the one who taught me how to break down a script
Oh, wow.
and do all that sort of stuff. And and even on Fatal Revenge, where I wasn't taking it seriously, I was sort of paying attention to what was going on. I remember sneaking onto the set of My Own Private Idaho and just watching Gus Van Sant in action. But so Steve, really sat down and talked to me about a lot of stuff, and I would see him. It seems to me like when I say recently, it's not that recently because it's 2020, right? But it seems to me like in the early 2000s, I would see him pretty regularly out near where Will Vinton Studios used to be, which was right down the street from Technifilm. Then it became Leica, and now it's like a high price condo or something like that. But it seems to me like I would see him, and I'd kind of, hey, how you doing? And either he didn't recognize me or remember me, and so he's got to be in his. I'm thinking he's got to be in his like late 60s now, if not late 60s, maybe even his 70s. But he was always a really nice guy. But I always felt kind of bad because it was like his movies just weren't that good.
Right.
He had a hit with whatever he did before Visions and Love and Dynamite. I think it was called like Fathers and Sons, which was a hit like on the festival circuit. Which the whole festival circuit changed too. Like nobody knew what film festivals were, right?
Right.
It wasn't until like the late 80s, early 90s where suddenly people were talking about them. But
Well,
yeah.
and that's another reason your name comes up a lot of time in this research, because you have done screenings of a lot of these movies that have been mostly forgotten. And so that's, I just like that light is being kind of shown.
Yeah, I think all this stuff needs to be, no matter how bad it is. I mean,
well, and I'm wondering, like, if we took any random state, like Pittsburgh, and like looked at all of the movies that were filmed in Pittsburgh, like I'm sure most of those are terrible too. Like, I wonder if it's just a Portland thing.
No, but it's interesting that you say Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is the city that's the one city that a lot of people know because George Romero came out of Pittsburgh, right?
Oh, okay.
And so he did Night of the Living Dead. And that whole scenario that I was talking to you about the local film labs and borrowing the cameras from the news stations, that's what him and his crew did. And they did Night of the Living Dead. But when you look at the movies that they did afterwards, they did some stinkers, man. There was There's Always Vanilla was a terrible movie. Season of the Witch was really terrible. I love The Crazies, but that's not a particularly good movie. And then, like in Kentucky, there was a scene there too, because William Girdler, who made Grizzly, which was a ripoff of Jaws, he made a movie called Abby, which was like the blaxploitation version of The Exorcist.
Oh wow!
Girdler made most of his movies in Kentucky, if I remember correctly. And as I started getting more into just the history of film, and my experiences in Portland, that's when I started to put together, okay, every city had to have had this. Most of the times it was they made horror films. That's like what Sam Raimi and those guys did, right? They made what was their first one?
Within the Woods.
Within the Woods. And then there was a guy out of Ohio who made a movie called The Dead Next Door, and so there was all this stuff a lot of it was in the 70s and 80s, but most of it was garbage. I mean, I hate to say it. So something would have to land properly. And so when you look at it, there's only a handful of examples of, say, A Night of the Living Dead or Malinoche that gets made and has a life beyond it. But you look at, say, I don't know. Like, we talk about the Miami connection, right? But there's a ton of movies that came out of Miami in the 70s and 80s. And, all of them, or not all of them, but a lot of them were financed, with laundered money,
Right.
And I know a lot of them because they did a handful of like blaxploitation movies that I've seen, but when you watch them, it's like there was a time when I had movies on VHS in my home that weren't even on IMDb.
Wow.
Now most things are on IMDb, but there was a time when it's like I would show people, oh, here's a movie, and let's go look it up on IMDb, and it wouldn't be there. And
That's
people were
crazy.
Like, and it's a lot of it is that stuff, because it's like, let's say it's 1975 or even 1985, and you make some low budget indie feature regionally that's so bad, either it doesn't get finished or you can't get a distribution deal. And maybe you can't get a distribution deal because not everybody signed the contracts, or maybe the sound mix just wasn't good enough. There might have been one little thing, or some investor got pissed off, and so then the film just sort of disappears, and again, I know this because I was around as some of these movies were getting made. The Courier of Death and there's one called Bad Trip, if I remember correctly.
Phillip Roth.
Yeah. And then Lowry did another one called like Red Snow or something, and all these movies, they come and go, and if you're lucky, some pack rat like me holds on to it,
or someone like us dredges it up.
Yeah, but I love this sort of stuff. I mean, I think that it's I mean, if it wasn't for all this, I mean, yeah,
it's the foundation.
Yeah, I learned so much on these movies,
Yeah.
and hanging out on these sets, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, it's how many people can say they almost died in Cascade Locks, Oregon, because they had a homemade squib went off and tore a chunk of, it's one of those things where I just imagine like, a quarter of an inch more and it would have severed your jugular vein. And it's like, oh my God.
So what do you, I'm going to ask two different questions here. One best. What is your favorite movie made in Portland? I love Drugstore Cowboy, right? So, I mean, there's like, what's my favorite great movie? I was going to say, what's your favorite and what do you think is the best?
I love Drugstore Cowboy for sure, but I'm a huge Brain Smasher fan. I mean, I absolutely love that movie. I'm so disappointed that it never got, like, it deserves a Blu-ray release with an audio commentary. I should be the one to do the audio commentary.
Are you listening, Criteria?
Yeah, right. Or not Criterion, but Shout Factory.
Yeah,
there you go.
But yeah, so I love Brain Smasher.
I guess we'll be doing that next month then.
Yeah.
We'll kick Untraceable off the list.
But like in terms of general Oregon films, we were talking Portland, but I mean, one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and that's, I think that, like, not only is that one of the greatest American films of all time, it's probably the greatest film ever shot in the lovely Beaver State. But yeah, I have a soft spot for Brain Smasher, and some of these movies like The Temp, Dr. Giggles, I've seen once, sometimes not even all the way through. And a lot of it for me comes down to when you say what's the best Portland movie, the equation is the movie itself, like, is it watchable, right? And then there's how much of Portland is in it.
Yeah.
So you take, like, is it Ironheart? That's the Robert Klaus movie.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great Portland movie in terms of locations and extras and all that stuff, but it's a terrible movie.
Yeah.
Like who wants to watch it? And
we did, apparently.
Yeah, no, you saw it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was
we were excited for a kung fu movie that never came.
Yes, right?
Everybody had guns.
And it was funny because Robert Klaus directed Enter the Dragon, so you would think. Then you realize, you start hearing the stories about, well, no, Bruce Lee directed everything that was good in Enter the Dragon. Like, that makes sense.
And then
now,
it starred like Bruce Lee's cousin.
Yeah.
So it was,
wow.
that movie was bad. That was bad. But so, yeah, to me, a lot of it is like, when I look at something like Brain Smasher, it's literally like taking a tour of Portland circa 1991-ish.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And so, so much of this city, especially downtown Portland, has changed so much. And as a kid, I went to the movies all the time at the Guild, the Music Box, the Fox, and the Broadway Theater. And I know for sure the Music Box, the Fox, and the Guild make an appearance. The exteriors make an appearance in Brain Smasher.
Oh, nice.
And so it's just like seeing that is like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the Portland that I remember from my youth.
That saved a lot of movies that we watched that were like, well, but it did have a lot of Portland in it.
Yeah.
So, well, you guys have more questions? I feel like we can just sit here forever.
I mean, we could,
fantastic.
There's somewhere you have to draw the line, but
the line must be drawn here. What else? You do wonderful pictures of passion flowers on your social media, which I'm a huge fan of. But you do a lot and have done a lot in a lot of different media and stuff like that. And it's been fun. I was kind of introduced to your name, at least via the Rick Emerson show
Okay.
in the early 2000s, probably. And you were on Court and Fat Boy a lot, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I
'cause
was. I
didn't
with
listen
those
to them
guys
as
a lot.
much, so but that whole group of people was sort of the same.
Yeah.
And so many friends of friends that I've known your name for a long time. So it's great to finally have you on the show.
Yeah, we've messaged back and forth about it for quite some time. So
Yes, you are.
It's,
You are a busy man that has a lot of things happening. So I'm grateful that you made the time to come here. So if someone is unfamiliar with you, where do you want to point them? This and saying this is the thing I want you to learn about David Walker,
oh man, I don't know.
or this is the thing I want you to buy from David Walker. I'll say it.
My website is just davidfwalker.com. I recently realized I'm spending way too much time on social media, so I can, rather than do that, I'm trying to focus more on my creativity. But you can always find me there, and that has
You've got a great new
jumping off.
comic strip there, actually.
Yeah, I'm working on my comic strip a lot, and I'm writing my first TV pilot, and which is not easy. But I made Fatal Revenge. I worked
That's
on
right.
the movie, so I
If
can
they
do
could do it,
anything.
you can do it.
Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. I mean, I'm co-writing a couple different comics right now, also writing some solo, but I've sort of gotten into this groove of co-writing. So I'm co-writing a book called Bitter Root at Image,
Yes.
co-writing Naomi.
Was just picked up for a TV series movie.
Film, that's what they
Film,
say.
yeah.
Anyway, it's optioned. Who knows what that means?
Yeah.
Exciting.
And then
That's
Young
great
Justice,
news, yeah.
working on that too. So
I
Yeah,
was
so-
interested. This is not a behind the curtain thing, but as I mentioned your character Naomi that has her own title, and it may be getting one again, but she's kind of gone out into different DC titles. And I was looking at the little credits or whatever, like Batman is created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger.
yeah.
And but I did not see a Naomi created by David Walker co-created thing, which I'm sure is just some legal and
I have seen
logistical
it
thing.
somewhere. Naomi created by Brian Bendis, David Walker, and Jamal Campbell. I've seen
Yeah,
it.
I think that's in the main
Yeah.
main title, but when she went to Action Comics, I was
Yeah,
like,
I know. They probably.
they
I'm
they
sure.
Bill fingered you.
Yeah, exactly.
They-
They Bill fingered me. I like that.
So many ways to take that.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thank you again for coming on again.
Thanks for having me on. This is fun.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Go to unipiper.com to find out all Unipiper things. Anything coming up in that land, Brian?
Next weekend we'll be at the Ramen and Whiskey Festival.
Oh, that's
Nice.
right. The
With
two things
Weird
that
Portland.
don't belong together.
Yeah, that's why Weird Portland is the charity of choice.
That's amazing. I think I'm selling my VHS tapes at some point on the 25th somewhere at the Tanker.
The
Is that a
25th
place?
of it is a place.
Okay,
Oh, and I've
I'll
been
be
to the
there.
VHS swap
Okay.
at the Tanker.
Well, there you go. I'll be doing that.
Very cool. I'll be there. I'll try and stop by.
Nice. Mark, anything for you?
No, you can. Well, yes, you can catch Todd and myself on the Mark and Toddcast weekly, and also on Fun Employment Radio, and which you can also find Poorly in the Movies.
Yep. Fantastic. I don't know what music we'll take to the, and maybe we'll just play you getting shot in Fatal Revenge again. Yeah, but thank you for listening. Thank you for the Patreon supporters that are out there. We really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you later. Oh, I don't have the sound, I guess, on this.
Oh,
Oh, Gene, I'm so disappointed in you.
That's so great. I figure that needs to be like my ringtone for someone. Oh, Gene, so disappointed in you.